Transferring wealth successfully starts with asking yourself questions that will give your family a better life now and for generations to come. In this podcast, financial professionals John and Michael from Copper Beech Financial Group guide you through eye-opening questions to help you discover the truth about your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to The Truth About Wealth with John and Michael Parise of Copper Beech Financial Group. Today we're going to be talking about life insurance, and more specifically, life insurance as an asset class. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Morning, Eric.
Good morning, Eric.
All right. So life insurance as an asset class, people think of assets. It's properties, cars, homes, vacation homes, jewelry. Big items. Life insurance as an asset class. What are we doing?
Well, we're gonna really tread in shark-infested waters a little bit with this topic. This is a polarizing topic in the world of financial services, perhaps more so than almost any other topic. Believe it or not, there's a lot of information out there in favor of this, not in favor of this type of topic. We happen to be in favor of it in the right circumstances, so hopefully we'll take today to provide a little bit of clarity on this and educate our listeners here.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Well, I think, generally speaking, when we look at life insurance, again, as a planning tool, and all of this is really couched in a plan, there has to be rationale and good reasoning for implementing this type of strategy. But if you look at life insurance as an asset, we happen to think it's one of the better assets that man has ever created in terms of providing a lot of different flexibility with a family's planning goals. So what we're going to talk about today from life insurance or being able to use it as an asset class, we're really going to look at it from really almost in many ways a tax conversation. If you look at life insurance is a very tax-favored asset under the tax code. So many listeners may be aware that the death benefit of a life insurance contract is income tax-free under most cases. So that on its own is a very nice benefit, and when you compare that to other asset classes. But what we're going to be talking about from an investment component is there are a few other assets other than life insurance that you can invest money into that will provide a tax-free accumulation. So I mentioned life insurance being one we're going to talk about today, but if you look at retirement accounts, that's typically one asset that most people are familiar with in terms of their 401k plans, their IRAs. The assets and the earnings inside of those types of accounts grow tax-free. The other one is charitable vehicles. So a nonprofit organization also has tax-free accumulation of assets within that account. So when we look at life insurance as being on par with that, a lot of the comparisons we make are really with retirement accounts. So that's really what we're going to pretty much focus on today.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah, so when you look at life insurance as that asset class, you have to kind of take a deep breath and say, well, what does that really mean? Well, anyone can buy a mutual fund, everyone can buy a stock, anyone can buy a piece of real estate, a home, whatever, and it has certain positions from a tax standpoint. So in other words, if you bought a regular mutual fund and it wasn't in an IRA as an example, all the earnings in that particular 401k plan, a mutual fund would grow and it'd be taxable on an annual basis, all those earnings. So they're not very efficient tax-wise. Real estate, depending on how it's purchased, could have some tax benefits, but ultimately when you sell these assets or move out of these positions, there's going to be a tax exposure. Mm-hmm. So if you layered life insurance as an asset class, forget the word life insurance for a moment. Just look at it as a tax vehicle that allows you to accumulate assets tax-free like an IRA would. But different from an IRA, when you take it out of the life insurance contract, if you do it properly, the income coming out is tax-free. A lot of people are unaware of that. So not only is the death benefit exempt from taxes, so is the cash value that accumulates in these vehicles. And when you take it out, if you do it correctly, it's taxed at no tax at all. So it's a really good vehicle when you look at accumulating wealth generationally. All our podcasts, we talk about trusts and moving assets generationally. Mm-hmm. Life insurance is a tool that allows us to be very tax efficient on both sides of the equation in that particular design. So when you look at building a portfolio, so Eric, if you said, I have $100,000 and I want to invest it into growth stocks, bonds, and cash as an example. So we're going to allocate that portfolio like any advisor would. We're going to put certain stock positions, maybe some mutual funds, or some other asset classes. I'm going to build your portfolio, and we're going to watch over it. Life insurance can be plugged into that particular position as well, because a lot of life insurance contracts that we look at have a investment pool in the S&P 500. Now, that's an equity position. So if I said to you, Eric, let's put a life insurance piece in your $100,000. Let's put $25,000 in this life insurance, and it's going to be in the S&P 500 fund, which is where I'd put it anyway, more than likely. And let's grow it. But that growth in that particular 25% of your portfolio would grow tax sheltered. You also have a death benefit associated with that, because under the law, you have to have a death benefit to the deposit you're putting into the contract. So let's assume there's a $500,000 death benefit as an example. So you put $25,000 in, you have a tax-free buildup of your cash value, and you also have a death benefit. So if you died prematurely, I'm going to knock you off for a second, Eric.
All right.
At that $100,000 now to the family, you get whatever the mutual funds or whether stocks you're investing into on the other 75% of your portfolio. But now you have this $500,000 tax-free benefit coming from the death benefit. So what's your account value now? It's $600,000 roughly, or it's $570,000, depending how you do the math. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot more. So it's a self-completing type of a strategy in a sense, where you create wealth with it because something happened to you as the insured. Now, we don't want to knock you off all the time, but if you didn't pass away, as an example, this cash value would grow in these life insurance contracts for 30, 40 years. Now let's do the math. So let's assume you're 65 and you say, okay, I'm retired and I want to take a look at taking income out of this contract. And we could take a look at that contract and say, okay, we could send you $50,000 a year tax-free for 25 years. Tax-free. That's a dynamic position when you look at these asset classes and you develop the strategies long term. Tax is important. And tax is a major impact on performance and wealth creation, along with inflation, as we talked about in the past podcasts. So we're very tax savvy when it comes to managing that tax. Insurance has to be one of the best vehicles in the world. I'll give you a case study. We had a dear friend of ours. He's a neighbor of mine. He had a medical practice, and both he and his wife worked in the practice. Now, he was 43 at the time, and I said to him, if you passed away tomorrow, Jim, what would happen to your practice? He goes, it'd be gone. My wife could probably step in, but we're raising 2 young children. It'd be a challenge. I don't have an exit plan. So I said, well, you need some type of a key man structure that protects that value. So Michael did a calculation, showed he needed X amount of liquidity to cover his wife's needs for her 30 years, because remember, she was still pretty young. Mm-hmm. So we came up with a death benefit on a key man policy. So he agreed, made a lot of sense. It protected his family. So life insurance in this particular discussion focused on a different role.
Well, that was more of a death benefit, at least initially, more of a death benefit discussion. Yeah. Sure.
So what I said to him, I said, but it also has these other benefits. I said, you put money in a 401k plan every year. You put money in an IRA. You put money all these different spots, 529 plans for the kids. Why do we take those funds and put them in this type of a design as a deposit? So I give you the bottom line. He's put $200,000 a year into this particular design for 10 years. It was totally paid up. He put no more deposits. And what we did was, that was his working years. So he was 43 to 53. That's when you work hard, you still got a lot of energy, and you're building your practice. So he said, so I'm fully funded this project for over the 10 years. He said, I'm in, let's do that. So he put $200,000 a year in this particular insurance contract. Remember, he had the death benefit, protect his family in case he would have passed away prematurely. But he also had this wealth accumulation model going on inside the contract. We did an illustration that said when he turned 65, assuming he was going to retire at 65, he was able to take out $421,000 a year tax-free for 25 years.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. I like that idea.
And he almost fell off his chair. He goes, how can that be? I said, well, the compounding of assets inside any tax-efficient vehicle, including IRAs, grows very efficiently. The problem with an IRA or a 401k plan or a pension, when you start taking money out, you have to pay tax on it at ordinary income tax rates. In the insurance design, that $400,000 was coming out was a compounded pool of money over that long, very period of time that made him very comfortable that this contract yielded this much income to him tax-free. So the question we talked about is, what size of a pool of money would I have to generate tax-free of $421,000?
Or net.
I'm sorry, net 21,000. A bigger pool. So he got that. So that's his main focus. Building his wealth for his retirement is not a 401k plan. It was around this key man funding because he needed the death benefit to protect his family. So we protected both sides of the equation from a strategy standpoint. And both he and his wife were excited about the plan. And it wasn't about life insurance. It was about the tax efficiency of the model and guaranteeing a value to his family in case he would pass away prematurely. It was a family plan, not just you need life insurance. Yeah. So it made a lot of sense. I didn't mean to drag that on, but the great stories come out of these conversations using these particular assets for an investment purpose.
Well, I want to jump in real quick because you kind of gave two extremes there, right? You had the first story was, this person could possibly pull out $50,000 a year for 20 years. The second person, $421,000 a year for 20 years, which is, fantastic. And obviously that was more of that type of strategy. But going back to that first example, they don't have to pull that money out, right? I mean, they don't. So it's, in other words, it's much better, in my opinion, than, having RMDs, right? Because you have to pull money out at a certain age from different types of plans. With insurance, you don't have to pull that out, correct?
Eric, you're stealing our thunder here.
Sorry. Yeah. Let's back that up.
And that was part of the conversation. The required and minimum distributions, which is the RMD discussion. Yeah. That was part of that conversation because he recognized that he'd have this need to have to take it out at 70 and a half, and it has to be spent down through your mortality. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he looked at all this, and by the way, part of the plan was also if he didn't need to take out that much money, he could leave it in the contract, and it created more death benefit. Yeah. So it had a very interesting dynamic life insurance, as I could use it today. If I don't need it today, I could use it tomorrow for my family. Yeah. So it's a family strategy.
And that's why a lot of families like it, Eric. From a flexibility standpoint, it gives you a lot of options. So you hit the nail on the head. From an RMD decision or a discussion, that's something that under the tax law, you have to take a required minimum distribution out of that account when you turn 70 and a half. I think right now there's a proposal in Congress to maybe bump that up to 72. But at a certain point in time, as you get older, you have to start taking those funds out of that type of account, which, depending on your family circumstances, may not be the best solution for you. Again, for many families out there, that may be perfectly fine because they need those assets during their retirement years. A lot of the families that we work with, whether they're business owners or they're other high-income earners, they're still working, that RMD discussion really becomes a burden for them. It becomes more of a tax headache, believe it or not, because they're either already continuing to work, they don't need that income.
Yeah,
and so
they hate it.
It becomes that really, it's inflexible in terms of their ability to be able to manage their own wealth, really, at the end of the day. So these life insurance policies can provide that flexible vehicle where, again, you don't have to take it out when you turn 70 and a half. You can keep it in there for a legacy decision for your children, or you can give it to charity. So there's a lot of different functions that you could use from a planning standpoint that these life insurance assets provide.
Can you make that decision on a yearly basis? I mean, is that something you can choose year by year, or do you have to set it? Okay, because I'm thinking, 1 year, heaven forbid, you've got a great uncle that passes away and you get an inheritance that year, and you don't need to take anything out of the insurance policy because that's going to bump you into a higher tax class or whatever. You just don't need it. So you leave it in there. Right. And then the next year you can make the decision to pull out your standard amount that you do every other year.
Right. Yeah. And the fact that it's a tax-free withdrawal doesn't show up on your income tax return, assuming it is structured properly and designed properly.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a great point. You have the flexibility where if you don't need the income in a particular year, it's not as if you are turning on, let's say, an income stream, flipping a switch, and that switch it can't be changed somewhere down the road. It's really on a year by year, a month by month basis if you want. So, those are some of the other, again, flexibility that a lot of families like. One of the other benefits, if you start again making this comparison between retirement accounts. By the way, we're not in disfavor of retirement accounts, but this is just another avenue that a lot of families of ours like to look at. But one of the other flexible provisions in life insurance policies is you have the ability to access the cash value before age, let's say 59 and a half. In your traditional retirement accounts, that's really where the threshold, because the Congress doesn't want families and people going in and let's say taking withdrawals from their retirement accounts because they are for retirement, which makes sense for most people. However, if you're confident and diligent in your savings, maybe you want to have access to that account before you're 59 and a half. Maybe you want to start a business, or maybe you want to take a withdrawal for your child to go to college. Whatever the family situation may be, you're somewhat limited in terms of your ability to access many types of retirement accounts, whereas you don't have that restriction inside of a life insurance.
Yeah, and that was my conversation with him when we talked about the college side, because Michael's point's well taken. Along the way, remember, his daughter at that time was only 3 years old. So if you go out 15, 16 years since that she's going to go to college, there was enough value in this accounts where he could draw out of the insurance to pay for the college education tax-free. So it's really got these dynamic, for liquidity events, the dynamic access to take things out tax efficiently to fund projects. Now, what came of this conversation, believe it or not, was step two. Step two is, can I do this for my kids? Question. So we have clients now we work with in Phoenix where they love this design so much, they deposited money in 3 separate accounts for their kids. They bought life insurance for their kids. Now, why is that important? Because their kids they have kids. So you're creating a death benefit protection for the family, but also grandpa was funding, or dad was funding the account for the grandkids as well, but funding the account for their kids, that when the kids turn 65, kids are in their 30s, there's a big chunk of money in these contracts where that's their retirement. Yeah. So dad was funding their retirement early on. It was through gifting. So it works really, really well, but also earmarked for taking care of his grandkids. So the dynamics of these particular designs for an asset class, and that's how we started this conversation, is a very unique asset class that has a lot of flexibility, a lot of tax efficiency, and most people can get confused because they're really afraid of the insurance agent. This guy's going to sell me life insurance. Well, there are players in the world that's their goal to sell you life insurance. Michael said we come from a different perspective. It's a planning technique. It's a tool we use. It's an asset that we use to accomplish different things for our families. And once they're educated, it's always about education. Once they're educated on the fact patterns and why it works, they all say the same thing to us. I never understood life insurance that way. I never really looked at it. No one ever explained to us that way. This is a very unique tool, and I understand it. So it's about education. So we're all about that. So before a client says yes, let's go forward with it, we spend hours educating them on why it has impact and why it's important in their planning model.
Now, because we talked a lot about retirement accounts, and many families look at these types of policies as a sort of an alternative to a retirement account. And we talked a lot about required minimum distributions and being able to access the account early. And what about, let's say, a Roth account? Because that's a common pushback we get. Well, I'm funding my Roth account, and this seems to operate fairly similarly to that. So why shouldn't I simply just invest into my Roth account and, let's say, buy term insurance, right? That's always when I said the shark-infested waters at the beginning, that's a common objection that we get, and that's out there on the internet and the financial community is, I should just buy term insurance and invest elsewhere. Why shouldn't families do that, or why should they do it, or why should they consider something else?
Yeah, I mean, that pops up all the time in the insurance world, and there are a couple pieces back to the Roth to start the conversation. You're limited to what you can put in your Roth each and every year. Life insurance, you can put any amount you need to. So there's differences in the amounts. Depending on your plan, what your strategies are, the Roth might not be enough to accumulate enough wealth for some of your goals. The term insurance is a great asset class as well. It performs a liquidity issue if something happens prematurely to the insured. But term insurance goes away. In other words, it's a period of time. So if you buy for example, Eric, if you bought a term policy for at a young age, let's say you just got married, you're 20 years old, and you have your first baby, and your goal is I want to protect my daughter or my son until they get out of college. So you might buy $1 million term policy. You pay a very little amount for that, and you're protected until your daughter or son's out of college. But then it goes away. Now, the challenge you always have is you could always buy more insurance after that, but what if you're not healthy? What if something happens to your health?
Yeah.
Now you're limited to what you can do. So you're always in this discussion with families. Do I buy a permanent design that's going to be guaranteed? Not guaranteed, but it's going to be.
Well, it can be. Sure.
It can be guaranteed, or one that's going to go away. So it's all about planning. They both make sense depending on what you're trying to accomplish. We have no problems with term insurance. But when you look at what Michael's question is, I could buy term insurance and do a Roth. You can. But the term insurance goes away, and you have limitations on your Roth. So if you have those strategies, it's okay. It's not that it's wrong. You have to live with that decision. And if something happens down the road where you can't buy more life insurance, tell me how that affects your family. Now, we constantly hear people say, do I really need my life insurance anymore? I have this policy I bought years ago, and my kids are all gone, and they're all in college. My wife and I, it's just me and my wife. Do I need life insurance? I said, you better ask your wife.
Yeah.
And the dialogue starts, because we always live longer than we think, more than likely, especially today's medical breakthroughs. So the risk is, does my wife have enough, or does my husband have enough to live their life expectancy if something happens to me? So life insurance becomes a tool that you can control, you can manage, you could keep it, you could get rid of it, you could manage it tax efficiently. So it really depends on the planning that you're trying to build for a family. But I'll tell you, 95% of the time when we bring up life insurance in a discussion as an asset class, people look at it and say, okay, you got to walk me through that. But once we walk them through it, I would say 100% of them say, I understand it. I see where it fits. Let's go ahead with it because it has other planning options for me as a family. Again, a death benefit in case there's a key man for a business, or you want to fund college educations for the kids, you want to give them retirement. All these factors come into play when you manage families. That's what we do for a living. Mike and I, that's what we do. We manage generations. So all our decision process around how does dad help generation 3? How does grandpa help generation 3? These are all strategies that we incorporate. And insurance is, as I said already a few times, it's one of the best asset classes we use from planning.
Yeah, and it adds flexibility. I think your example of, let's say, having a young child and having term insurance in place to cover that need for college funding or for income replacement until the child turns, let's say, adulthood, 20 years old, 18 years old. To your point, Dad, let's say it's a 20-year term policy. After that 20 years, that policy goes away. Now, there are a lot of term insurance policies will offer a conversion feature, which allows you to convert it to a permanent policy at that time, which certainly adds more flexibility, although I think the premium tends to be a little bit higher at that time because you're buying it at whatever age you're a little bit older at that time when you make that conversion. So there are some flexibility that comes along with term. But if you look at a permanent policy as an example, through that 20 years, let's say you bought a permanent policy for 20 years, after that same period of time, you have cash value that has accumulated over that 20-year period of time. You can do a lot of things with that. You could, let's say you don't need the insurance policy anymore, but you could surrender the policy and you have cash value that you've accumulated, and you can get some of those funds back that you've paid in premiums. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that design. Again, I think flexibility is really the key feature that a lot of families like when they go through this educational process, because again, you have a little bit more flexibility with how you utilize these assets to take into account changing circumstances down the road.
Yeah, I think the fact on term insurance, the fact pattern, only 2% of the policies ever pay out from an insurance company because people drop them. They don't convert them, as Michael's point is. So it's really a good tool. It just has to be used for the right objective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, so when you think about assets and particularly this life insurance asset, you have to sit down and think about, when you look at your portfolio as an investor and look at what you have to say, how do I maximize this? See, a lot of people think, and again, I apologize if I offend anybody, but they get selfish about, this is mine, this is for my retirement, and I get that. We're all in that boat. This is for me and my wife and my kids. They could be on their own, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a plan that you have to kind of wrestle with. But a lot of the families you work with have an objective. I want to be able to be comfortable, but I want to be able to leave something for my children. So this is that conversation where if you have a family that wants to achieve that, life insurance is a great asset to do that with, because you can spend everything you have, sell everything. Eric, you could sell everything and end up being, on the day you're passing, have $1 left in your hand. but have a $5 million life insurance policy and a trust earmarked for your kids are going to be okay.
Oh yeah.
So you could really manage the planning with, if you want to spend all your money, great. But if you have another objective, I want to be able to do something for my children, there's another piece of this. Now it's a death benefit play using the insurance, not an investment play. So you could really look at this on a lot of different angles, different planning options. And that's really what clients want to hear. They want to say, what are my options? How do I look at this world around me? How do I protect my family? And, we really get into that. We spend hours and hours with our families just talking about that fact pattern. What keeps you up nights? Yeah. What are you most worried about? If you could do something for your children, what would it be? For your grandchildren, what would it be? For community, what would it be? Charities in your area. So we spend a lot of time discussing these options. By the way, life insurance fits a very big role in charities. Yeah. There are people signing their policies to charities. I mean, there's a lot of very uniqueness about life insurance as an asset that could be a very important tool to someone's goals and objectives.
You guys have barely scratched the surface on this topic. And okay. I know we're out of time. I know we're really low on time. I think most people, I don't want to just throw out a percentage, but I would think that most people think about, okay, I know term insurance and whole life insurance, and I've heard of universal insurance. Those are really the three types. But within those, there are so many variations, and there's so many ways to utilize it. Like you were talking today about, as a asset class, different ways to utilize it as part of an overall plan. So by scratching the surface today, I know that you've opened up a lot of questions. If somebody has a question, who should they reach out to get that answered?
Well, Lauren in our office is our family office concierge. We've referred to her a few times on this podcast. She's typically the point of contact for any of our families that are currently working with us, or any families that may want to work with us. So she is typically the point of contact to reach out to in our office if you're interested in learning more about these topics.
Yeah, fantastic. Any closing thoughts today?
No, I think this was great. I think if there's one of the goals that we had in this podcast was to hopefully just educate families on why we think this asset class is useful to consider. Again, not everybody, this isn't a silver bullet that's designed to fit every particular planning situation or every family, but it's one that I think if you go and you look on the internet, it's one, again, that can be a very polarizing topic. And unfortunately, we've come across families that have in many ways made up their mind already without really understanding all of the nuances and the flexibility that can come with this type of strategy. And so I think it's important to talk to someone who really knows what they're doing on this to be able to help your family, because everybody needs customized advice, I think, for their family, not simply something you read on the internet or in a magazine. So
and my common thought as closing is, you don't know what you don't know. So you need to get educated. You need to sit down with someone that's going to educate you on these particular ideas.
Thank you guys so much. This was definitely a good, quick education today, and I hope that people do reach out to get those questions answered.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Our pleasure.
All right. And thank you all for listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast with John and Michael Parise. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when John and Michael come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Copper Beech Financial Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Copper Beech Financial Group. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
This material is for informational purposes only. Neither APFS nor its representatives provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Please consult your own tax, legal, or accounting professional before making any decisions. Securities offered through American Portfolio Financial Services Incorporated, a member of FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory and financial planning services offered through American Portfolio Advisors Incorporated, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Copper Beech is an unaffiliated entity of APFS and APA. Any opinions expressed in this forum are not the opinion or view of American Portfolios Financial Services Incorporated, APFS, or American Portfolios Advisors Incorporated, APA, and have not been reviewed by the firm for completeness or accuracy. These opinions are subject to change at any time without notice. Any comments or postings are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or a recommendation to buy or sell securities or other financial instruments. Readers should conduct their own review and exercise judgment prior to investing. Investments are not guaranteed, involve risk, and may result in a loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Investments are not suitable for all types of investors.